Welcome to the Clinical Pre-Hospital Care Research Forum Journal Club. Here in our PCRF Journal Club, we promote evidence-based practices by critically evaluating the latest science in emergency medical services. We hope our discussion will help advance EMS practice. Through the generous support of our sponsors, Limmer Education and ESO, we are able to make science more accessible and understandable.
I'm just going to go ahead and welcome us to the very last podcast of the year. So this is your December 2022 edition of the Pre-Hospital Care Research Forum Journal Club. I do want to thank ESO and Limmer Education for sponsoring us and making it possible for us to be here together. Thank you all for joining us live, those of you who are in the audience. And I would like to remind you before we get started that you can use your Zoom chat feature or your Q&A feature to ask questions as we go, and we're going to bring those into the conversation with us. So we are really excited today. I am Rimley Crow, and I'm joined by Dr. Tony Fernandez, Dave Page, and Jeff Rollman. And we also are really excited today because we have with us the lead author of our paper, Dr. Daniel Patterson. And the name of the article that we're reviewing is the Emergency Medical Services Sleep Health Study, a cluster randomized trial that was published in Sleep Health. And as always, this discussion is paired with an article in EMS World published by Dr. Tony Fernandez, and it's called Journal Watch. So I encourage all of you to check this out afterwards at emsworld.com under Education and Training. All right, so with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Patterson to the stage. And first of all, thank you for sharing your time with us. I know it's a busy time of the year, and so we're very grateful to have you here with us today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So for those of our audience who may not know you and all of your fabulous work, would you mind giving a quick introduction, who you are, what you do, and most importantly, how did you get interested in EMS research?
Well, I'm Daniel, and I am located at the University of Pittsburgh in the beautiful city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is located western PA. We are fortunate enough in this area to have a lot of EMS. There's in the county, Allegheny County alone, there are 40 plus EMS agencies, sort of unlike anywhere else in the nation. So we have a lot of EMS, especially locally and regionally and statewide. So we do a lot of EMS-focused research on a wide variety of topics. And long ago, 20 plus years ago, when I was a graduate student, I received a phone call from the former chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine here at Pitt, Dr. Paul Paris. And I was on my way to UNC Chapel Hill to do my postdoc. And he says, I hear you're involved in EMS research. And I had just finished a project with the South Carolina Rural Health Research Center that was funded by the Office of Rural Health Policy. And he says, I want you to come up, and talk with us and see if there's any collaborations that we can have. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. I'm on my way to my fellowship. I'll look you up in a couple of years. And luckily, we reconnected literally a few years later. And he hired me up to come up to Pittsburgh, and so the rest is history. In terms of my interest in EMS, my uncle was a paramedic for about 15 years, and I remember doing ride-alongs with him in high school and then in my undergrad years, and just amazed at the stories that he would tell me of just some amazingly challenging calls, but also the challenges associated with the work, doing the actual job, and how fatiguing it was and how challenging it was. And so my interest in EMS originated with him, a family member, and then I became an EMT and then a paramedic, and decided to devote my, my research interest in EMS, and the rest is history.
It's funny how that call seems to come in and change our lives. And so correct me if I'm wrong, but you still currently work some shifts as a paramedic and night shifts in particular.
I do. I worked Friday nights. My last shift was this past Friday night. I still work shifts for a number of reasons. One, I still love taking care of patients. The variety and what you see in the field is still of great interest to me. But also, most of my work is focused on the health and well-being of the clinician. And I don't feel that you can really appreciate that burden on the clinician, on the body, and unless you are really experiencing it on a regular basis. So I try my best to stay up to date. In fact, today, right before we got on, I was filling out my annual command paperwork for my local medical director. I've got to get it in today. So I'm taking pictures of all my licenses, my certification, my Con Ed over the year, et cetera, et cetera. So my next shift is this Friday. So I still work, I still love it. You know, one of my big focus areas is night shifts and how that really impacts the health and well-being. So you can't really know it unless you experience it. So I still do a lot of night shifts. Yeah.
I love that. It speaks to the importance of having EMS clinicians do the research related to pre-hospital care, because there is that unique insight you get from when you're actually doing the work and you're in the back of an ambulance and you're working all night. So I love that aspect of this. And we are going to talk a little bit about fatigue and sleepiness, as it turns out. I'm going to bring up a slide deck. We can use it or not use it. And for those of you who are in audio only mode, don't worry. We'll walk you through what's in it. They're just the tables from the paper that we can refer to as needed. So we're going to test this out again. Let's see. 2022, I should be able to zoom. Here we go. Let's test that. What do you see?
We see it.
Oh man, now we're doing it. I seem to have lost all my people. I can't see people anymore, but that's okay. All right. So this study, the Emergency Medical Services Sleep Health Study, is part of a bigger study. It was a cluster randomized trial. First, I want to congratulate you on this excellent study. I know it's a really big project, and it's part of an even bigger project called the EMS Fatigue Project. So perhaps you could just walk us through a little bit, what is the EMS Fatigue Project and where this particular part of the project fit in? Okay.
So, there's a big history behind this work. Early 2015, 2016, my team and I wrote a grant, including the National Association of State EMS Officials, our partners, Kathy Robinson, Dia Gaynor. We collaborated on an application, call for applications from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA. And they had put out this call for applications, and we submitted it together, and luckily we got funded. And it was a massive project. They're in 3 phases. The first phase was to do a massive evidence-based review of the literature to address multiple fatigue mitigation questions. And then we did that. That was published in 2018 in a special issue of PEC. And then we immediately transitioned to the second phase, which was to conduct an experimental study where we actually tried to test one of the recommendations, one or more of the recommendations that resulted from phase 1. And the one that was the most feasible, is education and training, right? The rest of them are really challenging to try to implement. So, we can talk about that for fill up a whole session on the challenges associated with all these different recommendations. But in terms of feasibility, we chose to test education and training and whether or not it had an impact on some sleep and fatigue related outcomes. And so we embarked on that in 2018. We just finished it and published it in the Sleep Health Journal. Phase 3 was led by a different organization, a contract organization, where they actually created a fatigue model, a statistical model that is embedded in the background of a computer interface, an application, where you can punch in different shift schedules and get some feedback on whether or not those are really, really fatiguing for workers who engage in that schedule. That work was led by the Office of Behavioral Research Institute. And all that work is available at emsfatigue.org, www.emsfatigue.org, which is maintained, the website, by the National Association of State EMS Officials.
Yeah, all of this work is so important. And I think we're not always great at communicating when these big projects come out. So it's really great that you just gave that URL. For those who haven't checked out the fatigue guidelines, they're really well written and really important information in there. And I mean, most importantly, let's talk about caffeine. I'm safe to keep drinking coffee, right?
I just, the timing is remarkable. You said that, and I immediately took a drink without even any prompting. So there you
Yeah,
go.
see, it was in our brains. Yeah, but I mean, this is the really important piece where we put evidence behind things like is it safe to drink caffeine to help mitigate fatigue when, sometimes we don't get to control the shift and sometimes we don't control how the shift goes for sure.
Right.
So definitely to our audience, check those out. We are going to dive into this part 2 study today, but part 1 is really important as well. So this particular study you mentioned, we're looking at the education intervention. That was what was feasible. So the goal of this particular study was to determine whether providing that targeted education intervention impacts key measures of sleep quality and fatigue. So before we dive into the methods, and I'll bring Dr. Tony Fernandez to join us, let's talk about why does this matter? What really prompted this whole project, or prompted at least this portion of the project? Why should we be studying sleep and fatigue in EMS?
Well, we know from, I don't know how many dozens of studies, and some of them, peer-reviewed, others not peer-reviewed, but still provide a lot of anecdote. For, decades, we have come to the realization that the job is fatiguing, right? When you disrupt your normal circadian biology, meaning we want to be awake during the day and sleep at night, when you disrupt that, you inevitably create a fatigue and sleep debt or sleep loss situation, which can impact our performance, can impact our health. Well, the job requires that we engage in this shift work, which would disrupt our normal circadian biology, which in downstream impacts are significant. The literature suggests that it impacts our performance. Obviously that would have a potential impact on our patients and also our safety as well. And then our health. Probably one of the more important things to me is how this is cumulatively impacting our workforce over time and how it's accelerating, potential conditions, cardiovascular disease being one. And, given those outcomes and given the inevitable that we are sort of accelerating problems by engaging in the shift work that is involved in EMS, we are compelled, we really are compelled to figure out, well, how are we going to deal with this? How are we going to protect our workforce? How are we going to protect our patients? Education and training is just one of many strategies that we can include in a fatigue mitigation or safety management system platform. And one of the reasons why we made this the focus of the study was, again, this was one of the recommendations that came out of that large evidence review. There is ample evidence to support education and training as having a positive impact on key indicators of sleep, health, and quality.
Absolutely. And something that you noted in the introduction of this paper that I think is important is that, okay, maybe there are some courses out there related to sleep and fatigue, but nothing specific to the environment of pre-hospital care. And we know that this is a really unique space. And so, the evidence would suggest that having something specifically tailored to this environment is really important. And that's precisely what this study sets up for.
Yeah, we spent the first 18 months of this phase of the study developing the education materials. I mean, we spent so much time laboring over not only the content, but also the method and the delivery and the timing and the duration of each of these modules and the content. We model the content after what experts in occupational medicine and sleep and fatigue would recommend. In particular, all the components of our 10-module program was tightly tied to the American College of Occupational Environmental Medicine's recommendations for fatigue mitigation. And we consulted with numerous sleep health physicians, experts in fatigue management, and had interviews and quotes and commentary from these individuals in video form in the material itself. So you don't actually see us as talking heads. You don't see, boring PowerPoints, you see a mix of content from sleep scientists, from sleep medicine physicians, fatigue experts, individual clinicians. We actually have interviews and testimonies from paramedics, EMTs, firefighters who give their story, and their context into the material. And we wove all that together into a 10-module program, and each module is about 15 minutes long, so very short. You know, we know, as we all know, you know, our attention span is quite short, and the time that we have available for anything is short. But also, we didn't want it to make it boring. You know, there are numerous resources out there tailored to other occupations. I'll give you nursing, for example. The Centers for Disease Control, NIOSH, a division of CDC, they have a program tailored to nursing. Well, we looked at it and we met with the people who developed it, and it was just not set up, and it wasn't tailored to EMS. So we said, you know, we just can't take what you created off the shelf and just plop it in front of EMS individuals and it be digestible and attractive. So again, we spent the first 18 months really laboring over the intervention itself.
Absolutely. And then those 18 months get condensed into one paragraph or two, maybe in the manuscript.
Right. Exactly.
So with that, let's talk about the methods. I'm going to bring Tony on.
Yeah.
Tony, come join us and let's dig into how this study was set up before we get to the results. I know people are here for the results, but it's really important to talk about how well the study was set up so that we know, well, what should we make of these results? So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Tony.
Thank you. And Dr. Patterson, I just want to thank you again for joining us today. I think this is a really interesting study and I'm excited to talk about it.
Thanks for the opportunity.
So I want to start off, as we often do. Can you give us an idea of, as you went into the study, what was your study hypothesis and the objective of the study? And can we describe that for our audience?
Yeah, so we hypothesized that those who received this tailored education training would actually have a more positive positive impact on their sleep quality and fatigue at the end of a 3-month period. And we can get into the details of the duration shortly. But, we believe that, the delivery of this information in the form that we created would actually have a positive impact mainly on 2 key indicators, in particular, sleep quality measured by the PSQI, which is the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index. Another great reason to be in Pittsburgh. Dr. Bicey, who is a sleep medicine scientist and one of my very frequent colleagues, because he is the expert in this stuff, he developed it back in 1989, and it's the most widely used measure of sleep quality. It's a survey instrument. And then we had some other fatigue-related indicators that we looked at as well. But we hypothesized that, you deliver this information to, some subjects, EMS individuals, it should have a positive impact. That was our hypothesis. And our objective was obviously to deliver this so that it would be attractive, in a form that could be digestible and very feasible. And again, going back to the development of the intervention, that informed our objective. But we want to improve sleep quality, sleep health, reduce fatigue. We know, and I want to point this out. I'm going to say this over and over again. We have to manage fatigue. We cannot eliminate it. Okay, we cannot get rid of it. There's no feasible way to do that. Okay, fatigue is inherent in everything that we do. No matter what your occupation is, you're going to get tired. But we can do things to maybe lessen the significance of it or to mitigate it as best as possible. So while we sought to improve sleep health and sleep quality as our main overall goal and objective here, we're grounded in reality that we're not going to get rid of it. Okay. Yeah.
What an important point, and thank you for emphasizing that. So as we all see on our screen right now, the title involves the words a cluster randomized trial, and at a really high level, I want to see if you can kind of describe to our audience what cluster randomization is and why you thought it was important for this study in particular.
So, as we all know, when we work in the field, we are affiliated with a particular organization. And many of us know that every organization is a little different. We may follow the same protocols for the most part, but we all have a little bit different culture from organization to organization. It's just the reality, right? So given that, then the way that people behave and learn and act and et cetera, in these organizations is probably similar in clusters, right? And so what we did was we knew that because of those factors, we needed to not do this as an individualized randomization, that we needed to sort of take into account that clustering, because potentially more than one individual who signs up for the study might be affiliated with the same organization, right? So we basically invited EMS agencies first. Okay, we went out and said, EMS agency directors, chiefs, managers, etc. If you want to take part in this study, then let us know, sign up, go through a screening procedure to determine if you're eligible or not. And if you are, we will give you instructions to pass on to your crew members who can then individually be screened and sign up for the study to take part in this. And so that's sort of the clustering and reason why we have clustering. And then once an agency is signed up, they are randomized to either the intervention group, which means in this particular study, a cluster randomized trial, the one phrase that we weren't able to add to the title because the journal said it's too long of a title, was wait list control. And we're going to get into that, right? So in agencies and individuals within the agencies who were randomized to the intervention group actually received access to the education materials via an online format immediately. And those who were randomized to the control group or the comparison group, which is called the waitlist control group, they had to wait. They had to wait 3 months before they actually gained access to the material. Okay, so everybody got access. Everybody got access to the materials. It's just at different times.
Yeah, and I think it was a really interesting study design. And thanks for that explanation. I think that was really clear, and I think that'll help a lot of folks online who are listening. So let's talk about, you said you started with the agencies and then you went down and tried to recruit some folks who were working within those agencies. How did you get to them? Can you talk to us about how you recruited them and kind of who was eligible and the like?
Yeah, so you know, again, we have a contact individual, a point of contact at each agency, and that's a manager, a shift supervisor who was designated by the director or the chief as being our point of contact. Sometimes it was the chief, him or herself. So once we got contact with them, we asked them to distribute the study flyer, mainly came in an email form, post the paper flyer in high traffic areas, et cetera, sort of the typical way you kind of recruit individuals. And individuals would basically go to a link on our website and go through a screening procedure. And the actual details of the eligibility, you know, sorry, I'm trying to look at it. I haven't looked at it in a little bit here, but essentially we wanted to recruit up to, you know, 50 people per agency. And the numbers that I'm spouting out here, you know, 40 total agencies across the nation, 20 in the waitlist group, 20 in the intervention group, and then up to 50 people per agency was our goal. That was based on a power calculation, a predetermined power calculation by our statisticians that allowed us to, at the 3-month mark, to see a clinically meaningful difference in sleep quality at that point in time. And so the details of that are very complicated, but you know, those are the numbers that we sought after. Was we really want to get to 50 people per agency. That's our goal. We really want to get to 20 agencies in each group. That's our goal. You know, and as most things go, we didn't exactly get to that point. We had some agencies that did really well. They got to 50 really easily in terms of their individual agency level enrollment. We had others who did not. And there's numerous factors for, you know, related to that. It can be time commitment, it can be a number of different things. And the other, you know, sort of wrench thrown into our system is the pandemic. Just FYI, doing a study, a field study, especially of this complicated nature during a pandemic, not easy.
Not ideal. Yeah.
0 stars, don't advise.
Not easy. Okay. But yeah, there's the numbers I'm throwing out here. You know, 20 per group was our goal. We got to 36. We got close. 50 per agency was our goal. We got close in a lot of agencies. Some met the number, others did not. We actually had to cut the enrollment time period short from the direction of our funder. So NHTSA said, we're giving you until this time period. If you don't meet it, then you just got to terminate the study early. And that's what we had to do.
Yeah, it was tough times for sure. And I just want to just to emphasize, in your recruitment, you were able to recruit a diverse population in terms of shift length. And so it wasn't just 24 hours, you had 12 hours in there, you had a whole bunch of different shift lengths to make some comparisons on. And I thought that it was really smart, but I think it's important to kind of talk to our audience about why volunteers were specifically not included in this study.
Yeah, so we did not include volunteer-based agencies because the nature of their interaction with their services is complicated. It's not that it's any less significant, but they may not work as many shifts, right, as our target population. Our targeted population here was to try to be, EMS is very diverse, very diverse. So to say that we wanted a homogeneous population is sort of a weird statement in EMS, right? But we wanted to make it as homogeneous as possible, meaning we didn't want volunteer agencies because they're unique. It's hard to control for their full-time job versus their volunteer job, those sorts of things. They're definitely worthy of investigation on these topics, but it just so happens that after discussion with all of our investigators that we wanted to hone in on paid services primarily.
Yeah, I think that was very smart and made for a much cleaner analysis to interpret for sure. So you talked about some of the time and effort that went into making these courses, and you ended up having 10 training courses and a whole gamut of sleep and fatigue related topics. So I see some that are hazards of fatigue and sleep physiology, and just to name a couple, and the all important managing fatigue was in there as well. We talked a little bit about this before, but can you give us some more idea about how these were accessed by folks and how these trainings were delivered?
Yeah, so we created these modules in the frame of, or the format of, a learning management system. So most EMS individuals are familiar with LMS type courses. It's delivered on an internet platform kind of thing. You have to access it via a password, username, password, etc. You get Con Ed credit for it, right? So given that most of our target population were familiar with that format, that's sort of the format we stuck with. And so we created these modules in a software program that allowed us to export the videos, the content. They had little quiz questions in there. We meshed all this together in an LMS format. Again, about 15 minutes per module. There's 10 total modules covering a wide variety of topics. And we hosted it on a secure server here at the University of Pittsburgh. And so those individuals who actually signed up received a unique username and password. And if they wanted to access the modules, they could, punch in their username and password on our website and then gain access to those modules, and they could watch them, as many times as they wanted to. And they could get Con Ed credit. So we were able to work with CAPC, with NASIMSO and CAPC, to gain approval for a little over 2 hours of Con Ed credit for those who wanted it. Not everybody wanted it because, depending on what kind of system you work in. I can remember when I was in North Carolina, all of my Con Ed came through my agency, right? And I didn't have to worry about my individual efforts to go get Con Ed. Here in Pennsylvania, it's different. I have to actually individually be in control of my own Con Ed. And so I need to keep track of the hours I get. I need to document it. I need to present it to my medical director at the end of the year, like right now, for example. So not everybody applied for the Con Ed credit. A lot of folks did, though.
Yeah, and how great is that to get Con Ed and participate in research study at the same time? That was really great that you were able to do that.
Yeah.
Which again is no easy task either, to get your courses ready and to approve for Con Ed. I mean, I commend you for all the work you put into this. This was no easy task.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit. I'm going to move on. I know people are chomping at the bit to get to the results of the study. But there's two more things that I want to bring up I think it'll help contextualize things. So we talked a little bit about the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, and how popular that is, how important that is in sleep studies. I mean, But you did use some other sleep scales as well, which you mentioned, the Epworth Sleepiness Scale and the fatigue Chandler Fatigue Questionnaire. Why did you think it was important to not just look at the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, but to look at these others as secondaries?
So these other measures, such as the Epworth Sleepiness Scale, the Chandler Fatigue Questionnaire, the OFER, the Occupational Fatigue and Recovery Scale, these survey tools have been used in a wide variety of studies, and I've used them over and over and again in my studies. So we have some base rate or some comparison data from these different measures. And while we may not have, the thought was, while we may not have an impact on PSQI, our main outcome of interest, we may have an impact on other indicators of fatigue. And, for those of you in the audience, there is no gold standard measure of fatigue, okay? There's no blood assay yet, okay? So we don't have a biomarker. Well, people are working on this, okay? We don't have a gold standard biomarker, but we have some emerging ones. But we don't have a blood test. We don't have a truly objective measure. Most of what we rely on for assessing sleep health, sleep quality, fatigue is all based on self-report. Sadly, some of these tools have some questionable reliability and validity. And just so happens, one of the efforts that we completed as a part of the phase 1 was to review all these different scales and to provide the EMS community with some confidence if they picked up the OFER or the PSQI or the Chandler Fatigue Questionnaire or these other tools, that they could have confidence as to whether or not they had some reliability and validity behind them. And so we chose a menu of items. We couldn't include all of them because the burden obviously on the individual would be significant. Sure. So we chose the ones that we had some comparison data for, and that made some sense as primary or secondary outcomes.
That's great. And finally, last thing, I think we need to go into really high level, similar to what you did with the cluster randomization. Can you talk to us a little bit about why you chose an intention to treat analysis, and then a little bit about what it means when we're talking about your intention to treat versus your per protocol results?
No, good questions. So yeah, we've heard of this thing called intention to treat analysis. It's almost like onomatopoeia. What does that mean, right? So in randomized studies, when we randomize individuals or groups into the intervention or the control, which is the most simple form of randomization here, we hope and pray, fingers crossed, that when they go into these groups, that they behave as requested, that things proceed as envisioned, right? And at the end, when we compare them, that we have confidence that only those in the intervention group had exposure at a time period to the intervention, and those in the waitlist group did not have exposure, or the comparison group, to the intervention materials. And when we go to compare them, we can truly feel confident that, if there's any signal, any difference in the outcomes, that we can attribute that to, what they were exposed to or what they were not exposed to, or what they were given versus not what they were not given, regardless of what happens, regardless of how they behave, if they deviate from protocol or not. Because remember, we did randomize them. We assigned them to a group, right? And so if you assign them to a group, then you need to treat them that way. Intent to treat. So the intention was, you do this over here in this group, and you do this over here in this group, and we're going to analyze you that way, no matter what you did, no matter if you obeyed protocol or not. And that's the cleanest, sort of most common way that we compare data from a trial. And then, then we deviate or we go to our second analysis, which is, okay, wait a minute. How did they actually behave? Yeah. Right? How many adhered to protocol? How many actually did what we asked them to do? And maybe they only did it a little bit, and maybe a lot. That's a per protocol, or some call it as treated analysis. And those are typically the second approach to looking at data from a trial compared to the primary approach. So the primary here again is intent to treat. So we analyze data as intended, and then we go look at their individual behaviors and say, okay, did you adhere to protocol or not? And then we look to see, oh wow, we may have not seen a difference in the intent to treat because people deviated or didn't follow protocol or whatever. But when we look at them in a different way, the one based on protocol, do we actually see any differences? And that's typical or common for a lot of field-based trials, that those two approaches.
Yep, it sure is. And that was a great explanation. That was exactly what I was looking for. So thank you for that. We are ready to get to results, but before we open the floodgates, I just want to let our other panelists get a chance to ask some questions if they have specific methods related questions. And I see Jeff popping up here. So Dr. Patterson, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to moving on and talking about your results.
Great questions. Thank you.
First off, thank you, Dr. Patterson, for sharing this terrific research, definitely very impactful, as we talked about in the introduction, and truly awesome work that you've done here. Just have a quick question, kind of putting this in context before we talk about results. We talked about randomization and the different agencies that received this treatment intervention initially and then later. I was curious if you could just talk a little bit more about the blinding potentially, since we know that folks sometimes act a little bit differently if they know that they're being researched, if they're being studied. And obviously with this, they are being asked all these questions, so they know it's going somewhere. But I was curious what both the agency level and the EMS clinician level, what all they knew about this, if they knew this was going to get published and an amazing paper later on. Is this something that agencies maybe just thought of as a free Con Ed opportunity? I was wondering if you could just speak briefly about sort of how much the agencies and clinicians knew about what was taking place, because that could certainly impact whether they responded and partook in the different modules as well as their answers.
No, you're right. You raised great questions and observations here about blinding. Field-based experimental studies are very difficult to do and to maintain blinding, especially in the format of or the design that we had. So when an agency signed up and we did the randomization, we sent them the instructions on what was next. And if they paid close attention, they knew which group they were in, all right, from the very beginning. Okay, so we could not ensure complete blinding, all right? Now we did what we could within what was feasible to maintain sort of as much blinding as we could in terms of, oh, you're not going to get the education materials until this time. But if we have, sort of savvy, non-distracted individuals, whether they be the agency directors and chiefs who were our point of contact, or the individuals who signed up themselves, they could figure it out. Okay, not everybody did. I mean, we got some comments from folks that they sort of knew what was going on, but we don't have systematically a major concern that everyone who was randomized to the waitlist group knew exactly what was going on. We don't have that concern, although we know that some knew that. But we could not ensure 100% blinding, whether it be the individuals or our crew or our team members. If we did, that would be called double blinding, where we would be blinded and we wouldn't know which agency or individual was in which group, and the individuals themselves wouldn't know. Well, that's not possible with this kind of design. Single blinded, meaning the individuals wouldn't know where they were. We tried our best to adhere to that as best as possible, but we couldn't ensure it completely. So yes, some probably knew exactly which group they were in, and whether or not they chose to stay in the study once they learned that, we don't know exactly, because when someone would leave, they wouldn't just basically call us up and say, hey, I found out I was in the waitlist group, see you later, right? We didn't get that kind of communication. But what we do know is that withdrawal, attrition, when people sign up and then leave, whether it be we can't communicate with them anymore, or they voluntarily said, you know what, we're out of here. That did not differ by group. So if it differed, meaning we had a substantially more individuals in the comparison group, the waitlist group, leave versus the rate in the intervention group, then you could probably point with some significant confidence that, yeah, the lack of blinding was a major factor. But we didn't see that. Okay. So yeah, that was a challenging thing to deal with, especially in this kind of study. Trying to invoke any kind of blinding was a major challenge. But our key indicator here to give us some solace that that wasn't a major factor is that there was no difference in the withdrawal attrition rate. Yeah.
Excellent question. Excellent point.
That did a heck of a job, definitely realizing that and controlling for that and doing their best.
All right. I mean, I could talk about methods all day, but I know that there will be either mutiny or mass exodus if I choose to do so. However, for those who are looking at the time wondering, let me assure you that in the bento box of research, methods are your main dish. So we want to spend time on those. It's really important to understand where the research came from before we decide whether or not, how we should take these results and if we should apply them to our own settings. So with that, I'm going to move us forward a little bit and remind the audience you can participate and ask questions as we go. So moving into figure 1, this is typically the diagram where we flow through who we included, who got excluded, who stayed, who went, all of those things. But the short summary here is 50 agencies were screened, which is no easy task in and of itself. 48 were deemed eligible. And then 36 ultimately enrolled, 16 of whom got randomized to an intervention and 20 to that waitlist control group. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Patterson, tell us a little bit about anything we should know about these agencies. And then I have something that stuck out to me as really important here.
Yeah, so, again, our goal here was 40 agencies with 50 people per agency, right? And as you can see, we just came underneath that 40. Again, the study was terminated early by the funding agency. So if we maybe had 6 more months to fulfill the study, maybe we would have gotten to 40, who knows? But again, the enrollment goal was 50 per agency. You can see in those sort of first few cells there in terms of the allocation that we had on average around 20 per cluster, 20 per agency in the intervention group. And then if you look over to the comparison group, which is sort of the non-shaded arm to the right, you can see that we had 18 per cluster. So we were sort of similar in terms of the mean per agency or per cluster in the beginning. And then again, our first time point of interest here is 3 months. So you can see the next cells down talk about the 3-month follow-up. And that was our main time period of interest. And going back to the methods here, we chose 3 months because the main outcome of interest, PSQI, is grounded in someone reflecting on their previous 30 days. All right, so we just can't say, we're going to follow you for a week and then reassess PSQI. You can't do that because the instruments are not developed for that. The instruments are developed for 30+ days. We chose 3 months because the previous literature that we modeled a lot of our confidence on, and meaning that we knew that if you deliver education and training, 2 to 3 months later, you should see a potential impact. And so based on that systematic review of the previous evidence, we chose 3 months as sort of our time point to potentially see an impact here. And you can't go on forever because people lose interest, right? So you gotta be very judicious in your time period here, and that a number of factors go into that. So at 3 months, you can see that we lost some individuals, about 2.4 individuals per cluster in the intervention group, about 2.6 in the control group. So not really no major differences there in terms of attrition, okay? And then you can see, how many individuals, we get into the as treated versus per protocol analysis. You can see how many individuals actually engaged with the intervention materials themselves. The one thing about research is it's volunteer, right? We're not going to hold your hand or your feet to the fire and say, thou shalt do this or else, right? That's not how research works.
The IRB would have a problem with that.
They would probably put me in IRB jail for sure. So while we have confidence that individuals who sign up probably have some interest in what we're doing, we can't guarantee that they will follow protocol. So you can see in these boxes, we do indicate where individuals actually viewed the materials or not, okay? And it's not everybody, okay? Not everybody viewed the materials. So that's the one challenge associated with doing field research. Yeah.
Absolutely. And not to bring it back up again, but doing this during a pandemic when Zoom fatigue was real, maybe we need some Zoom fatigue guidelines after all of this. I think it's a challenge to get people to participate in virtual education at a time when demands were high and we were all kind of tired of sitting and watching virtual things.
Yes, absolutely. You definitely raise an important issue. The sad thing is we started recruitment before shutdown.
Right.
And we actually shut down recruitment from March of 2020 all the way until June, July. So we weren't actually collecting or enrolling any new organizations or individuals during that time period.
Right. That's just an extra challenge to what's already, a tough study design. And it's hard sometimes to get people to volunteer their time to do these things. So I think it's still impressive what happened and what we do get to see from this. Now, I like to highlight table 1 always just because that's our gut check. Did randomization work, right? So do we see if the intervention and the control arms are similar? I don't see too many differences here, but something in the similarities that I found maybe alarming, but this was the thing I wanted to bring up, is that 2/3 had no formal fatigue management program. And that seems really low to me, but I'm curious, what did you find about those who did have fatigue management programs? Did they provide any detail on what kinds of things were happening? Because I like to look for the pockets of excellence where we can find them.
Yeah, that's a good observation. And I'm actually leading another trial right now, another field-based trial funded by NIOSH, and we have over 106 agencies enrolled. It's a much bigger study. And the vast majority self-report no formal fatigue management program. Now, the ones who did, we asked them, okay, can you describe it? Most of them didn't provide a lot of detail. Some of it was, no using your cell phone at this time period while with patients or something like that. You can't work a certain number of shifts back to back, or we cap the number of hours of continuous work at this. They're very restricted programs. They're not what I would call comprehensive type programs that include multiple components and programs and interventions and elements that you would probably characterize as a program, right? It was more or less maybe a policy here, a policy there that really constituted, their program. Yeah.
Which is even more alarming when you think 2/3 had no program and the third that did, maybe it wasn't that comprehensive. And so that speaks to the importance of reading. There are guidelines and suggestions and things that we can do about this. It also speaks to another measure. I know we didn't really highlight this one, and it wasn't the point of this study, but would perhaps make a good area for future study. We talk about the EMS safety attitudes questionnaire. And for those who don't know, Dr. Patterson is super humble, but he's the one who really brought this to EMS and adapted it to EMS so we can look at things like safety culture. And I can imagine that having a robust fatigue program would probably positively impact safety culture. So that's something for us just to keep in mind. It wasn't the goal of this study, but certainly all of these things are deeply intertwined.
Right. Absolutely.
I do want to get to the drum roll moment, and let's talk about, so what did you find? What were our key takeaways? Let's talk about the primary outcome first. What did we see?
And so the primary outcome is PSQI, the sleep quality measure. No surprise that a vast majority of those who were involved as individuals suffered from poor sleep quality. Okay.
Myself too.
Yeah. I mean, it's very pervasive throughout the EMS industry. Okay. In terms of the intent to treat, when we compare changes from 0 at baseline to 3 months, we did not see a dramatic change in the intervention group or the comparison group. Okay, so that was a little bit, unsatisfying, but we go back to a lot of the factors that are at play here. Pandemic, the vast majority are suffering from poor sleep quality. The thought that a single intervention is potentially going to have a major clinically meaningful impact is a little bit probably ambitious, but it's worth trying because you can't leave it alone. You just can't do nothing. So starting off with what's feasible, which meaning education and training, that's where we began with this study. And what these data would suggest in terms of the intent to treat analysis, that we don't see a difference in the sleep quality between the two groups at 3-month mark is that sleep quality, number one, very pervasive, and number two, making a meaningful impact on that is probably going to take something more than just education and training.
Yeah. And it's so common that when we find that moment of, no significant difference, right? That it's common that these studies don't even get published. I think it's so important that this work was published, which is not easy either. We talk about how hard it is to get not just the manuscript ready for publication, to summarize 18 months of work in a paragraph, to go through the peer review process and respond to reviewers, and to do all of that to show us, hey, no significant difference. It speaks really highly of this research team. It's really important, and it speaks highly of the journal for choosing to show this. It doesn't mean that the study wasn't meaningful. This is actually extraordinarily meaningful in my eyes, because it tells us where we need to look next and what could be the drivers behind this. Because my guess is the things that this research team faced are not unique, and that we would face these in our own EMS agencies if we were to just try to roll out an education intervention. One of the things that stuck out to me, you talked about, there's these drivers, and we can identify a bunch of them that probably contributed to this result. But we talk about that adherence. That piece was really important. Very few, or maybe not very few, but fewer than we would have liked for sure, adhered all the way through the modules. And it's my understanding that it was actually the last module that had the action items for how to better your sleep quality. And that's the one, I would have hypothesized that's the one that's going to have the effect. So a lot of people didn't make it to that part of the intervention.
Right. And if you want to scroll to one of the other graphs for the per protocol analysis, we had 10 modules. Okay. Is there one with the slope? Do you have that one in there?
There we go.
Okay, here we are. Okay. So while we are
this is figure 5 for those who are following along.
Yeah, figure 5. So while we were disappointed in the intent to treat analysis findings, meaning that, as intended, they were randomized to waitlist control or intervention, and we treated them as such, no matter what they did, at 3 months. When we actually look deeper into a per protocol analysis and look at those who actually watched the modules, and then how many modules did they watch, right? Those who actually watched more modules, the high number of modules, 7, 8, 9, 10 modules, they actually, on average, had a more positive impact on their sleep quality and their self-reported fatigue. It may have not been clinically meaningful, but the dose is something to pay attention to here. Sort of like a dose-response relationship. And it just also speaks to, they probably got more information that could help them in their unique situation from those materials. And maybe they changed some of their behaviors, their personal behaviors, to improve their sleep quality at least a little bit. Now, did no one receive or have a clinically meaningful difference in their sleep quality at the end of the 3 months? No, we actually had some. We actually had a handful of individuals who actually experienced a clinically meaningful change, and there's benchmarks for this, a clinically meaningful change in their sleep quality from baseline to 3 months. So it is possible. And maybe what we are talking about here is that maybe not everyone in the EMS agency needs this right now when the materials are offered. Maybe it's just individuals who are really at a certain time point in their career, or a certain time point in their health, their own personal health, or maybe it's just situation specific, who could benefit from this kind of material, and who perhaps would receive the best benefit from it in the end. So I think one of the key takeaways here is that for the folks who adhere to protocol, we see a positive impact, maybe not clinically meaningful, but a positive impact. And that would suggest that there are subsets of individuals in EMS agencies who are perhaps in need, more so than others, of education and training. But for those other individuals who are probably at a similar fatigue level, or at least somewhere close, and who may have not benefited from this, it may take something else. It may take a combination of components or interventions to actually move the needle for those individuals.
Yeah, and I think this is promising, right? This is the part where we're like, okay, if more study needs to be done, and this is a key. So I know our audience has some questions as well, and one of them is likely, well, are these modules going to be made available to the public? Or, this seems like something that could be important to my EMS agency. Where should I go if I want more information on how to do this at my own agency?
No, great questions. And the modules will be made available. It was supported by federal dollars, and therefore it is the public's material, right? So the National Association of State EMS Officials has worked with other organizations to set up hosting these materials. And I think, if I remember correctly, one of the first states to actually plan on implementing the availability of these materials is the state of Maine. So I think some states are jumping on this early, and the materials will be available. Or maybe I need to connect with Kathy Robinson just to double check and see if it's been released yet. But it's been a while. It's been a while since the study's been done and the processing through getting clearance and all that kind of stuff. But yes, the materials will be available to everyone in some form on some platform. Some states may integrate it into their state level LMS. Others may not. Others may rely on private resources, for example, to host these modules. But they are and will be available. Yes.
Absolutely. And we can link that in our show notes as well, along with the fatigue website for those who are interested in, first of all, I haven't read the fatigue guidelines. I probably should go do that. We'll make sure that those are available. And Jeff, I'll turn it to you for what might be one of our last questions. I know we're rounding out the hour here and I want to be respectful of time, but this is a really fabulous discussion. So Jeff, turn to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And most important question I had before was, is this going to be shared? Are these education modules going to be shared? So great to hear that. Thank you. Looking forward to that. I was thinking just in terms of policy takeaways, both for agency leaders, EMS agency leadership, as well as students and educators. We have a lot of students and educators that are on this podcast. I was wondering if you have any advice or suggestions in terms of perhaps incorporating this somewhere in educational curricula, or maybe does this seem more appropriate in new hire, or perhaps as an annual refresher training, just if you have any thoughts sort of on where to integrate this.
No, great questions. And if you go to phase 1 of the fatigue project, one of the suggestions from the expert panel who came up with the recommendation about education and training is you try to incorporate sleep health and fatigue education and training as a part of the onboarding process for new hires, and every couple of years at a minimum, essentially just like your ACLS, PALS, etc. Format, that you try to incorporate some level of education, some intervention, maybe not intervention, but maybe some sort of education and training related to these topics more frequently. And so those details are tied back to the 2018 evidence-based guidelines. Yes.
Sounds good. So it's not just as simple as just checking that box once during initial ed and never have to think about it again. Thank you. And thanks again for sharing your terrific work. Definitely looking forward
thank you.
to the future research for next phases.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a good point. So I'm really excited about the future research and the other research that's coming out of here. We didn't talk about the text messaging and all of the other data that got collected through this study. So I want our listeners to stay tuned. Lots of opportunity to talk about sleep and EMS. I have the unpopular task of getting us out of here on time, but I do want to take a moment and talk about something that's not related to this study. And I know Dr. Patterson is too humble to bring it up himself. So, the love for EMS research runs deep in your family. And for those who don't know, I also love EMS research. You did know that part, but I was actually born in Pittsburgh. So perhaps you could say a few words before we go about the Yinzer medic.
I work with the Pittsburgh Emergency Medicine Foundation, which is a small nonprofit where we raise money for education, research grants, and materials grants. We buy things for agencies. We bought for the city of Pittsburgh, we bought a Lucas device several years ago. So we try to provide resources to local regional organizations. And the little Yinzer medic thing is just one way that we try to raise funds for that foundation. So no, thanks for mentioning that, Dr. Crow. But yeah, if you're interested in seeing some of that stuff, feel free to go to 412yinzermedic.org.
Really
Appreciate
cool
the
work
donation.
by your son. Really appreciate what he's doing for EMS research. I think it is a big deal and something worth checking out. So definitely do that. We'll add a link to in the notes. I do have this unenviable task of taking us out of here. But before I do, the year's not quite over and we've got some more cool research stuff coming up. So stay tuned. On Friday, December 16th, we've got the best of the EMS education research in 2022. So make sure to check that out. And then we are going to have a special edition version of the podcast looking at a recently published scoping review that is examining the diversity within the EMS workforce. So a couple of things you surely won't want to miss there. I want to thank you all again for attending and for your great questions and participation. And a huge thank you to Dr. Patterson for your ongoing dedication to EMS research and for all of this important work around fatigue and EMS.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
And with that, I'm going to try to carry us out to an outro video. One day I will get this awesome video right. So thank you all.
We hope you have enjoyed and learned from this PCRF Journal Club. Please share it with other interested EMS professionals. An archive of past journal clubs can be found at pcrfpodcasts.org. You can also find us on Facebook at PCRF at UCLA and on our website, prehospitalcare.org. A special thank you to our sponsors, Limmer Education, providing educational tools for success at every stage of your EMS journey, and ESO, dedicated to improving community health and safety through the power of data.